Okay, this section of the tutorial is going to go through getting these outline surfaces set up for the laser cutter. So there's still a few things that we need to do to this to be able to cut it. The first of which is going to be perforating the surfaces. So in the previous segment, we undid the surface perforations because it's going to interfere with the unrolling and the labeling. So I'm going to turn off my text layer, and I'm going to go back into my perforations layer, make sure it's active, and I'm going to make it a different color just so that it's more different than the purple surfaces. I'm going to go into my surface perforation Rhino script and set one surface, bake that surface, make sure that I'm baking it onto the perforations layer, hit OK, and do that for all of the different surface segments that you want to have perforated. Bake. Okay, same thing here, set the surface. Because of the way the script is set up, if you were to just select all of the surfaces at the same time and try to perforate them, it's going to give you errors. It makes kind of an outline around all of the different surfaces, and then it screws up the geometry if you try to do multiple ones at the same time. It won't give you the same borders and those sorts of things. I'm not going to go through every surface. You get the gist of what's happening here, so you can go through and do that. I'm going to turn off the visibility of my Rhino geometry, hide this guy, and then go in here and do the actual perforations like we had started to in the previous version. So split. The objects to split are going to be all of my planes, so I'm going to right click and select objects, make sure you're using layer management, hit enter, and I'm going to split it with all of my perforations. So select objects, hit enter, and that should go through and select or split at all of the outlines that you made using Grasshopper. It may take a minute. You might want to do this in multiple segments, maybe not all at the same time. It will be really slow, and it may potentially crash depending on how many perforations you have. I would err on the side of bigger rather than smaller. So now I have surfaces that have all of these perforations in them, and I've got my text dots on, but I don't have reference points at each of the four corners of the edges of the surfaces. So what you need to do now, like I said before, we need to convert these dots into something that we can use, right? So right now they scale up or down. No matter how big or small I zoom into this thing, the dots are always the same size relative to the screen. And so there's a couple of different scripts that we can use that will allow for us to turn these into objects, right? It'll allow us to turn them into text, and then it'll allow us to turn that text into outlines. So on the Canvas site, in the video tutorial, so under Files, Tutorials, Video Tutorials, and Stretched Volumes, which is this project's name, I've put a couple of, a zip file with a couple of different script files in it. They're Rhino script files, which means they have a RV extension. So if I were to go in and look at these on my desktop, I've got RVB is the extensions. I've got one called divide curve to dash line, that's going to come later, text dot to text, and text to text object. So we're going to have these three scripts. We're going to use these three little mini computer programs, custom mini computer programs, to plug into Rhino to automate a couple of things for us that we can't do using the basic Rhino or Grasshopper commands. So in Rhino, under Tools, you want to go into Rhino script and click on Edit. So this is a little interface where you can do your own scripting in Rhino. And don't be afraid, you don't have to know how to script anything, you don't have to know how to computer program anything. But you just need to kind of follow some instructions. So the way that I had set it up before was using a Word document, basically, that had all of the script written out in it. So in here there's kind of the script that the text that you would need to cut and paste into Rhino over top of this, and then you would save it, and it would you would save it as something sample, and then I'd be able to load it into Rhino. You should be able to just load these. So under tools, instead of going through and making your own script, you should be able to load. So if I want to add, you won't have any of these guys, so I'm going to delete them. If I want to add a script, I can go into the place where I unzipped the RhinoScript files, and I can add all three. Well, I can add them one at a time. I can add the curve to dash line, and then I click on it and type in load. I open RhinoScript again, load, add, text dot to text, open, click on that and hit load. You need to do both steps. So tool, RhinoScript, load, the last one, tool, RhinoScript, load, add, and the last one, hit OK. And I'm just going to hit load just to make sure that it's activated. So now I can go in and actually use these, right? So the first one that I'm going to do is take these text dots and turn them into text. So tools, RhinoScript, this time I want to run a script, and I want to take the text dot into text. So it's this middle one here. It's going to ask me to select the text dot, so because I've got them on their own layer, I can right click and select objects and hit enter. And it's going to take all of those little guys and take all of these green guys and turn them into small text below them. I want to make actually a second layer. I'm going to undo really quickly. I need to have two text layers. I forgot about that. So this is going to be text objects. And move this up in the stack so it's beside my other text. So I undid the script, so I haven't done anything yet. I want to activate this text objects layer. Run the script again, tools, RhinoScript, run, text dot, OK. Select the dots, they're on my green text layer, select objects, hit enter. And I should be done now with that. So if I hit enter again, it will stop the command. I can turn off the green layer, and if I right click on here and select objects, it doesn't look like anything happened, but it's because our text is really small. So I right click on here, text objects, selected the objects, and you can see up here now it says 36 text objects. I need to go into the text properties, which is under the A, and change the height of these to like 6 inches or something, and hit enter. And now you can see that we've got all of these text objects at the different locations along the surface. And why they didn't all select, I'm not sure. Let me just quickly go back and see what's going on. Tools, RhinoScript run, text dot, select, select, enter, turn this off, right click, select objects, and they should, if we change it to 6, they should all get bigger now. Why these aren't showing up, I don't know. Alright, I'll have to go in and troubleshoot that. But you can see in the other locations, I'm not sure why some of these aren't showing up. It's saying that they're there, but it's not letting me, it's not selecting them with everything else. So I'm going to turn off the surfaces for a minute, select everything else, and change all of the heights to 6. Now they're all showing up. I am not sure what was happening there. But you can see that they're all there, they're all bigger. They are adjacent to the edges of the planes. The only thing that's the matter with these guys at the moment is that they are kind of basically filled in outlines. or they're still actually editable text, they're just no longer a dot. And there's two layers on top of each other, which doesn't do us much good. So I'm just going to select objects, duplicate objects. It's not going to recognize that, so I'm going to get rid of those. Not sure how many duplicates there are. Of course, I have issues when I try to demonstrate this. Okay, so the other thing that we need to do is turn these text into outlines, because the laser cutter doesn't cut solid chunks out at a time, it cuts outlines out. You can set it to engrave, but it's going to take an incredibly long amount of time, especially if you've got a lot of little pieces of text. So I'm going to run another script under Tools, Rhino script, run. This time I'm going to convert the text to text objects and hit OK. So I can select my objects by layer, hit enter, and it'll go through. And as soon as it's done calculating, you'll see that our text is now all outlines rather than filled in volumes. So those are all good things. The last thing that you need to do, or one of the last things that you need to do, is to turn these surfaces into outlines, because the laser cutter doesn't care if it has a fill in it or not, it wants to know where the edges are. So I'm going to select all of the planes, and I'm going to duplicate dupe border. And so it's going to turn all of those into outlines. And I'm going to, while they're still selected, put them on a cut layer. So I can turn off my planes and just see the outlines. The next thing that you want to do is explode all of those. So we don't want it to cut everything into pieces. We want to be able to have these interior lines be dashed. So I'm going to explode, so that I now can go in and select lines separately. Where there were two planes touching each other, now I have two lines on top of each other, and I want to get rid of those. I don't want to have anything extra that needs to be cut. So edit, select objects, duplicate objects, and it'll go through and pick any locations where there are two things touching each other. In these locations where it looks like there should be a highlighted line, they're probably infinitely smallly separated from each other, so I'm going to remember where those are and then go in and manually take them apart. So I'm going to type in delete and get rid of these. I'm going to grab this guy and get rid of it. And I had a couple of cases of that over here. And just double check that all of my lines are just single lines and don't have any extra lines on top of them. If they did have an extra line on top, when you went to pick on it, it would ask you for which one you wanted to select. And this will just help so that you don't accidentally cut through your entire project. You might want to go in, you can see that a lot of these, the locations of this text is off of the actual, would be outside of the boundary of what you're actually cutting. You can go in and adjust those, or if you have a case where it's on top of a line, you might go in and adjust that as well. Or any of these ones that are matching a line, that are basically saying this side goes to this side, and I'm just going to give you one label. You can delete those because you're not going to need them. You're not going to have to match these two to each other. They're going to remain connected to each other. So unfortunately, there's no way to tell the text dot command where to put the dots. It's going to put them on the line, and you would have to go in and manually adjust them if you wanted to. You could also, I may have already said this, but you could put them outside the object, so that you would have kind of a template of the leftover material showing which edge goes with which, if you didn't want to have the outlines of the numbers scored into the object itself. The last thing we need to do before we send this to the laser cutter is tell it that we want these in-between lines, so the ones that are connecting, that are connected, we want these to be dashed lines and not solid lines. If they're solid lines, the laser cutter is going to cut entirely through it, and we don't want that to happen. We want these to be perforated lines. So I'm going to go in and select all of the interior lines and change their layer to dashed. One more Rhino script. So I'm going to go in under Tools, Rhino script, and Run. And I've got a divide curve dashed script in here, and hit OK. Again, unfortunately, you can only do this one line at a time. But there aren't that many that it's going to be too onerous. So you can go in, it basically takes a line, and then kind of like an Illustrator where it gives you the dash and the gap, it gives you an option to set the length and the spacing in between. So I'm just going to set it to 5 and 5 for sake of being able to see it. And it's gone in and divided up my line into individual line segments. If you were to just take your line and change the line type to dashed, which you can do, or dash dot or dashed, it's going to look right, but it's not going to cut. The laser cutter would still see it as a continuous line, even though the line type is dashed. To make it actually physical objects or physical lines that you can have the laser cutter cut individual segments of, you have to run through this script or make your own dashes. So again, tools, RhinoScript, run, divide, curve, dashed, okay. Set it to 5 and 5 again. If you right click, it will bring up the RhinoScript subroutine interface so that you don't have to go through the tools, RhinoScript, run again. Select your next line, 5, 5, dashed, 5, 5. Okay, once all that is set, you want to make sure you'll get handouts and you'll get an orientation on the laser cutter, but basically what it does is reads things as either cutting, scoring, engraving, or inside cutting. So cutting is cyan, and you can just click on the layer name and set it to cyan. Scoring is magenta. So again, click on the layer color and make it magenta. And there's red, that's an inside cut. You don't need to worry about that. So I'm not really dealing with any of these other line types. The only thing that I want to do is set the text object to red so that it scores those lines. I don't want to cut them out. I just want to lightly mark them on the surface of the object so that I can be able to see what I'm doing. The reason that we're dashing these lines rather than scoring them is that your surface is going to be curving in a couple of different directions. In your case, it's mostly, I think, always going to be convex curves because of the geometry that you're creating, but if it weren't, you would want to be able to fold in both directions. So it's kind of a good habit to get into when you're setting something up like this, up for the laser cutter, that you set it up to dash rather than score. Another consideration is that you may, depending on what you're cutting the material out of, this Rhino surface that we modeled basically has no thickness to it, right? So it's as if it were a really, really thin sheet of paper that we were cutting and scoring and folding, and then matching the edges up with. We'd have to glue these edges or tape them. If you're cutting something as thick as cardboard or even as thin as like a thin ply chipboard, you're going to start running into material issues. So you're going to, when you start trying to glue these things back together, the thickness of the material itself is going to start getting into the way. So you might, you might be able to account for that just in the way that it's glued and kind of offset it so that you're gluing the interior face of those surfaces together. Or you could go in, if I turn my planes back on, or sorry, let's see, I don't still have the original, oh, here they are. I had hidden them, right? So I have this poly surface. Just going to move it out of the way for a minute. If I were to go back in and unroll UNROLL surface, If I chose to explode it and kept the labels on and hit enter, it's going to look like a mess over here, but basically it's going to take each of those pieces and split them apart and set them up. And you would go through the same process, except you would have each individual piece with an edge that you would need to match. But you would go through and create duplicate the borders. In this case, you would want to set them up on a sheet. So I would want to go in and start moving these guys around so that they fit better on a sheet in the laser cutter. So they weren't just a continuous line. I would go in and kind of try to put them as close together without touching as possible, so that I'm maximizing the efficiency of my material. So I have as little fall off as possible in terms of the waste from the laser cutter. I think we'll try it this way first, and just turn these off. And if you start running into problems, you can go in and do the unroll surface and explode equals yes. So your model in the computer is at full scale. You're obviously not going to laser cut out a full scale version of your building. So you need to scale this guy down. I don't have the project handout, so I don't know exactly what scale you're being asked to make the model at. But you can think about it, and you can also refer to the Rhino tutorial that I gave you. Let's see where we are here. Arch 6065, 6055. There's a page in here in the handout that gives you all of the scale factors for different scales. When we get towards the end. So in here, you can see all these model unit scales. Basically, oops. If my building is full scale in the computer and I want to convert it to 1/8 of an inch, that's 1/96th of the original size. Basically, you take the 8, which is 1/8 of an inch unit, and you have to convert it from inches to feet, so it's times 12. So 96 is 8 times 12. And you use that as the scale factor in Rhino. So if I switch into here, take all of these and type in scale, I'm going to use 0, 0 as my origin point, and the scale factor is going to be 1/96. And now my project is scaled down to approximately 2 feet wide. The next thing I need to do before I export this to the laser cutter is think about, and I'm going to just select this and do ZSA to reset my zoom, is to think about how this thing fits on a page that's going to fit into the laser cutter. So the laser cutter holds up to, 2 feet by 4 feet material. So I'm going to make a reference layer or a material layer. I'm going to call it sheet size. And on that layer, I'm going to draw a box. So starting at 0, 0, 48 inches wide, 24 inches tall. So I need to put my unrolled surface on that. So I'm going to move it into place. I'm going to rotate it. Turn off ortho so I have a little bit more control over the rotation. And basically line it up as closely as possible with a corner of the sheet, not touching the corner, but as closely as possible lined up to it with about 1/8 of an inch offset, so that I maximize the use of my material, right? So I still have this much material still left to use further down the line. And you guys might combine with each other. You might have a sheet that's 1 feet by 2 feet. In that case, you would want to take part of your object and move it, right? And I would want to line these guys up, copy this label, so I remember that this edge goes with this edge, and draw in the missing line here since I moved my line over. So I'm going to draw that and put it on the cut layer. And I'm going to get rid of these dashes and put in a new line that's a solid line because I want it to cut all the way out. And put it on my dash layer, or I'm sorry, on my cut layer. And I could cut it out that way. And I've basically just made a forced break here where it would otherwise have been able to stay connected. So either way that you do it, you should be fine. And then from your top view, as we would if we were make 2D'ing or exporting this, we're going to select the object, type in, one last reason that we want to make sure this is aligned with 0, 0. So this sheet, this 2 foot by 4 foot sheet, mimics the bed of the laser cutter. And so the cutter is going to start in the 0, 0 location and go out from there. So we want to make sure that the thing that we want cut is in the positive XY quadrant, right? So it's up, it's above the red line and to the right of the green line. Anything that's over here, outside of this, in the negative quadrants, are outside of the range of what the laser cutter can cut. So we want to make sure that we're inside of that. So I would export file, export selected, and I want to export it as a DXF file, which is an AutoCAD Exchange format. So I'm going to call this laser cutter stretched. Call it whatever you want, just as long as you remember what it is and where it is. I'm going to put it on my desktop. You put it in the right folder. And the default scheme should be fine. 2004 Naturals is more so what we want. If you go into edit schemes, you can check that the surfaces are exported as curves, the meshes are as meshes. If you're exporting something, we'll get into this later, if you're exporting something for rendering, you would want to make sure that the surfaces are meshes. We don't have any surfaces with fills in them, we just want the line, so that's fine for us. So you could hit save and then close and export this as 2004 Naturals and hit OK. And that's the DXF file is what we would want to take to the laser cutter.